A child wrongfully taken from her mother speaking out against a tired system in the Department for Children and Families.
From a decades-old computer system to staffing shortages and errors, our Laura Ullman investigated what went wrong and joins us in the studio. Laura, what did you find?
Kat and Kiana, over the past few months, I spoke with DCF about why they think so many families were unjustly broken, and a daughter and mother who reconnected after their ill-fated separation.
How can people even begin to understand what it's like to have your kids taken from you? What does that feel like?
Death. Feels like you died. But you're still here and you still have to try to stay alive so that someday you can see them again.
Sarah LaFave says she lost custody of her daughter, Mercedes King, following an alleged domestic abuse incident by her now ex-husband. She says it happened in this trailer in the early 2000s. King's mother tried to take custody of her children, but a DCF caseworker thought her relationship with the father made her incapable and refused. The Department for Children and Families placed King in her father's sister's house, but King says her aunt was even more physically abusive than her father.
We didn't feel like we were going to make it out alive.
So King was sent to foster homes, group homes, secured facilities.
I ended up moving about 30 different times from the years of 2017 to about 2022.
Through that time, King and her mother tried to reconnect. King says as a teenager, she met with new DCF caseworkers, and together they realized a decade prior, the department had made a huge mistake. King's mother's name ended up on another woman's file.
In the end, it was kind of me that it felt awful. It felt awful to hear that because the damage is already done to the kids, to me.
A DCF caseworker issued an apology to King and her mother. Over the past few years, more stories like King's have come to light. A report by the Vermont Parents Representation Center, or VPRC, shocked former Social and Rehabilitation Services Commissioner Bill Young out of retirement.
And then after about 2 months, I realized, my God, it's true. These stories are true.
Young says the story that struck him the most was one of a 7-year-old girl taken into custody by a judge after she got a bruise on her back from sledding. DCF was convinced the mother was abusive even after the sledding story was corroborated by the school nurse.
To have a situation where people begin to think, in the interest of protecting a child, you can skew the evidence a little bit. Something that the people that raised me would have called lying.
In just over 4 years, all 30 abuse substantiation appeals Vermont Parents Representation took up were overturned or dismissed.
And that doesn't happen unless the system has real problems.
What King calls an incentive for DCF workers to take children into custody relates back to a case in 2014 when a child was killed, he says.
Do we want it? Now!
You begin to see the numbers of children in custody going up because of that risk-averse reaction.
Brenda Gooley of the Department for Children and Families believes the problems stem from immense staffing shortages and extremely high caseloads for social workers.
We have 178 family services workers in the field today. 30 of those positions are vacant, and 17 of them are filled by workers who are in their first 6 months on the job.
With the vacancies and inexperience, the surplus gets dumped onto someone else.
But once the caseload goes above a certain point, everything breaks down and they begin just responding to the crisis du jour, and they really can't be held accountable if things go really wrong.
Young says because much of DCF's focus is on economic services, 80% to be exact, accountability for family services can fall by the wayside.
That was when we lived in Burlington.
One of those cases include LaFave's, who ended up on a child abuse registry due to DCF's mistake. The placement can also impact job opportunities and have a major psychological effect.
They couldn't do it anymore at all. And I couldn't even go to a grocery store and see somebody with their kid.
If they're placed in the child protection registry, they're probably not going to be hired by about 30% of the jobs in Vermont.
The mixed up files that caused the 10-year separation between King and her mother lie within the nation's oldest child protection database. Vermont's system is 32 years old.
It is so old that you wouldn't use a mouse. You would tab right or left to navigate that database.
Reasons that kids come into custody, how to know which ones that we're talking about, why
you can't even write in your own?
No.
Workers use piles and piles of code sheets, which entering in numerical codes for words manually. Caseworkers often encounter technical difficulties.
This happens quite often.
DCF has applied for funds to replace the database, but they say it will take years to complete. But state lawmakers are working on legislation to make sure what King went through never happens to anyone else.
It's proposing that there is a centralized committee that would review whether or not all the steps that needed to be taken to decide that that needs to be substantiated occurred.
H661 also proposes lengthier means of consideration for whether a parent's name should be added to the child abuse registry. The bill has passed through the House and Senate, awaiting the governor's approval.
The last year or so, I've really worked on healing and becoming my own human being and living in the real world.
These days, Mercedes King works in Montpelier, advocating for children. She credits the reunification of her and her mother to her new DCF caseworkers. But she says it can't just be a few good eggs holding the system together. In the studio, Laura Ullman, Channel 3 News.